Welcome back, everyone, to This is a Woman podcast. I am your host, Sophia Laurie, and today we will have a guest on with us, Julianne. She is an attorney with Advocates for Faith and Freedom. She was actually just on one of the last podcast episodes, and we talked about their Save Girls Sports lawsuit. But we are going to dive into Trump's executive order to protect girls' sports, what it really says, what is an executive order? What power does an executive order hold? And what does this mean for blue states? So let's dive into it. Well, welcome, Julianne, back to This is a Woman podcast. We're so excited to have you on again.
Thanks, Sophia. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. And so we had you on just a few weeks ago. We were talking about a whole Save Girls Sports lawsuit that's still currently going on. And we might give a little update on that and let people know what's going on there. But there's been a lot of movement just in the past 11 days. It was only 11 days ago that Trump put out the executive order to protect girls' sports. And we saw that picture that I think we're going to see in the history books of Trump signing this executive order and all these girls around him in their uniforms and their hair with their little bows and all the different athletes there in the room. Such a win. But let's, I guess, before we dive into what even the executive order said, Julianne, what is an executive order? Is this now the law of the land? What does an executive order actually do?
Sure. So, first of all, that picture is incredible. It sends such a powerful message. And honestly, it's so refreshing to see an administration and a president who supports our young female athletes. So phenomenal picture. I love that picture. And the executive order is huge, and I know we'll get into that. But it's the fight isn't over. While executive orders do carry a lot of weight, they are considered federal law. They're not totally secure. And like I said, the fight isn't over. An executive order basically is a directive that any president can issue an executive order to essentially carry out the tasks and the functions of the executive branch. So going back to the civil ethics lessons that you may have learned in elementary school or in school, we have three separate branches. We have the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and so President Trump falls in the executive branch, and so he issues these directives that do carry a lot of weight. And essentially, these executive orders tell the executive branch how they need to operate, how they need to direct federal funding, and he has the authority to issue those executive orders. And so it's a huge tool that the Constitution affords to our presidents, but it's not the law of the land. Well, executive orders usually trump state law. They can still be overturned by the Supreme Court when we get a new administration with a new president. Just like we saw with President Trump, he repealed a lot of the terrible executive orders that President Biden had issued. And so they're not a stable form of enforcing the policies and values that so many of us hold dear, but they are certainly important and do carry a lot of weight. But really, the muscle is in legislative action, which I'm not sure if we'll get into, but legislative action is really where we see a lot of change and security in the values and policies that we want to see put forth.
Amazing. And I know it can be so hard to be like, what are all the branches and what all that? But that was just a great overview of like, this is what an executive order means. This is what it does. And like you said, the fight is not over. When I saw that image, when Trump signed that executive order, I was like, yay, celebrated, was super excited, was so glad to see actually a president on our side for once. I mean, these past 4 years, we have been fighting. We haven't even had the opportunity to have our voice heard by a president with the last administration. And now to actually see fellow female athletes in the White House for a signing of an executive order to protect girls' sports was phenomenal. So the fight's not over. This executive order, Julianne, what are we actually seeing? What is it saying? What is coming out of it? I know it focused a lot on Title IX, but there's differing state laws. But before we get into maybe what the blue states are doing, what did we see from this executive order?
Yeah, so this executive order, it's it's incredible. And like we said earlier, it's incredible to see an administration that has our backs, that is willing to boldly, this shouldn't be a bold stance, quite frankly, but is boldly standing up on behalf of our female athletes. And so it's incredible. Really, what this executive order does, it's really nothing new in the sense that it's not providing any new law. It's simply reinforcing what Title IX is intended to protect and what Title IX was intended to do. And so back in the 60s, the 70s, Congress had saw that there was a concern for equality for our female athletes, and specifically within the education context. And so they passed this federal legislation that was intended to prohibit discrimination against biological sex. And so as Congress intended it back then, I know that there's a lot of confusing definitions that are out there today, but as Congress intended it, they intended Title IX to protect against discrimination on biological sex, and that meant biological males and biological females. And so, obviously, with different administrations, we've now seen the original intent of Congress completely usurp that that understanding of Title IX. And so, what this executive order does is it recognizes what Congress truly intended. It recognized the need to protect our female athletes. And so this executive order says, hey, if you are not going to recognize biological sex, if you are going to allow biological males to take the podium positions of our female athletes, you're not going to get federal funding. And like we mentioned earlier, presidents have the authority to control how federal funding is given. And so we talk about these blue states that are saying we're going to continue to allow boys to take these positions from our female athletes. Okay, then you don't get the benefit of our federal funding, which a lot of these school districts, the majority of these school districts, rely very heavily on federal funding. And so this executive order is huge because it reinstates the original meaning of Title IX. It has the back of our female athletes and says, you know what, it's not fair that female athletes who work tirelessly, who work so hard, who sacrifice a lot to get on these teams, only to have those positions taken away and given to a biological male who has significant biological advantages. We don't even need to get into those, but really it's so demeaning and unfair to our female athletes. And for so long, they've had to put up with this. And so this executive order is bringing back common sense. And so it's incredible, again, to see President Trump stand behind our female athletes.
Absolutely. And like you said, it is going back to common sense. This executive order isn't instating this new idea. I mean, I think even 10, 15, 20 years ago, no one would disagree with the fact that males and females are different and that we should have separate sports. I mean, I was actually talking to some women this weekend, and we were talking about the sports issue in Title IX. And, you know, this wasn't something that was put in like over 100, 150 years ago. This was 1972. So these women were telling me how themselves, they recognized what a big difference they made in their lives because they're now in their 70s and 80s. And they were saying that flip with Title IX in 1972 just opened up the floodgates for opportunities for them in sports. And to see that in their same lifetime, in the same lifetime of people who fought for Title IX and to have equal opportunities in sports, we were watching it be erased. And I think people are waking up to that. I mean, even with the election, I think this was really the issue that pushed people to the polls, not necessarily to be excited to vote, but they were voting for common sense. And we're seeing that come out through this executive order. But when this executive order came out 11 days ago, California and CIF made a pretty clear stance within, I believe, 24 hours that they're not going to follow the executive order. And they continue to do this whole thing of our hands are tied by state law. And so we know the state law is AB 1266. We really dove into it on the last podcast with Taylor and Caitlin. But AB 1266, for those of you listening, if you haven't heard about it before, it was put into law in 2014 here in the state of California. And this is what allows you to play on sports teams, locker rooms, bathrooms, based off of gender identity and not off of biological sex. And so, Julianne, when CIF, and CIF is the governing body of high school sports in California, when they said, we're just going to follow state law. Our hands are tied by state law. Does the state law go over Title IX? What are we actually seeing here?
Yeah, so it's really interesting that they so boldly took that stance. I don't think this is the hill that they want to die on, and so going back to kind of our initial civics lesson, when we're talking about executive orders and federal law and state law, obviously there's all these different bodies of law, but when we're dealing with federal law and state law, and when there's a conflict between federal and state law, under the supremacy clause of the Constitution, federal law always trumps. And so, anytime that there's a conflict between a federal piece of legislation like Title IX and a state law like AB 1266, Title IX always trumps the state law. And so, the fact that the state of California is saying, you know what, our hands are tied, we have the state law. Really, I would like the leaders to go back to their basic civics lesson, because that's completely disingenuous. It's virtue signaling. It's an attempt to say, you know what, sorry, our hands are tied. This is all we can do. That's not all you can do. You have federal law. You now have executive orders that clearly say what the law is and how we should be handling our athletic teams. And so to have a state like California, to have our the CIF take such a stance, really it's just virtue signaling at this point, because they should know how federal and state law work together. And so when AB 1266 comes crashing into Title IX every day will take over state law.
Absolutely. And, I think what we saw in the last administration, we saw not only in California and in blue states, leaders, different people in office start to say, our hands are tied by the state law. They would even say, we're just doing what the president wants us to do. We're doing what this administration wants. This administration, I mean, we saw Biden was trying to rewrite Title IX. We saw all that go down. And so it's really interesting because they kept just saying, well, this is what the administration wants. Our hands are tied by this and that. And now that we have a flip of an administration and the administration is saying to protect girls' sports, it shows that these people in charge are actually super supportive of boys and girls' sports. I mean, that's what it shows at the end of the day, because again, they could have followed the executive order and just said, oh yeah, we're going to just keep doing what the administration asks us to do. But it really brings to light that they're willing to die on this hill. It's such an interesting hill to die on. Again, even with the election, we saw the country doesn't want this. I think men and women's sports, men and women's bathrooms and locker rooms, this is like the one unifying issue. This is something that we've never seen Democrats and Republicans actually unite so strongly on, at least in my lifetime. And so it's really interesting to see especially in California, the legislators, CIF continue to double down on this. But again, great news. And like we talked about a little bit last podcast that you were on, Julianne, but maybe you can give an update. You guys, Advocates for Faith and Freedom, with Taylor and Caitlin, the girls running cross country and Riverside Unified, are making the first official challenge to AB 1266. For those that maybe didn't listen to last episode, and for those that did, can you give us a little overview and update on that case right now?
Sure. So, yes, we're very excited. We are bringing the first challenge to AB 1266. And so, last time we were on, you had Taylor and Caitlin, who are two high school female athletes out in Riverside, California. And we are currently in the midst of litigation. They are suing not only their school district, but also the state of California, challenging AB 1266, challenging violations of their Title IX rights. There's some free speech violations as well. So it's a huge lawsuit. But we're ready to hold the state of California and these school district officials accountable. For too long, we've allowed the state of California and these school district officials to basically erase our female athletes. And really, I can't emphasize this enough. Our female athletes work so hard to get to where they're at. You were a female athlete yourself. You know the sacrifice, the time, the commitment that goes into playing a sport. And so to have that completely ignored by the adults in the room, really, this is what it's coming down to. It's the adults in the room that are saying, you know what? we don't care about our female athletes. We're going to allow these biological males to take these positions. And, just working with Taylor and Caitlin, and as we've been preparing the lawsuit, we're hearing countless stories of biological males that are taking awards. The transgender student in this case took the fastest female award from another female athlete. They're taking podium positions. They're taking college scouting opportunities away from our female athletes. And that carries so much weight when you're a high school female athlete and you're working really hard, just to have an adult tell you, you know what, your hard work and your sacrifice doesn't matter. We're going to allow this biological male to take your place and to take essentially replace the hard work that you've done. That says a strong message to our female athletes. And so this lawsuit is huge. As we've seen, the state of California, has basically said, we're defying the executive orders, we're defying the Title IX. We're going to continue to allow boys to use female locker rooms to play on female sports. And so we're seeing just kind of the brazen attempts by the state to ignore federal law. And so, like we mentioned earlier, executive orders, they hold a lot of weight, but we need to see legislation. We need to see judicial decisions. And so we're hopeful that with this lawsuit, we can get judicial opinion on what's going on and have courts weigh in on this and, say this is not okay. We want our judicial courts to recognize common sense as well. And so we have this lawsuit. Actually, this Friday, the school district officials should be responding to the lawsuit. And then sometime in March, the state of California will have to respond to the lawsuit. And so it'll be interesting to see what their response will be. They may try to get the lawsuit thrown out, but we're ready to take on the state of California. And we couldn't be more proud of Taylor and Caitlin for taking the bold stand that they have and standing up not only for their rights, but on behalf of female athletes throughout the state of California.
Absolutely. And this is truly going to be one of the lawsuits that goes down in the history books because, again, this law, AB 1266, has been in place for over 10 years in the state of California and no challenges so far. And we know Taylor and Caitlin aren't the first female athletes to have a boy on their team in the state of California. It's unfortunately happening basically in every county up and down the state. But we also see the fact that this lawsuit, when Trump signed this executive order, you guys weren't like, oh, okay, then we don't need the lawsuit. We're done. Everything's safe. This is a prime example of that. The fight is not over. We'd be remiss to think the fight is over and just celebrate and be done. If anything, this is the first page of now the fight. I mean, we work so hard to get administration that supports us. We work so hard to get society to recognize that this is really happening, that boys are really in girl sports, because I think 2-3 years ago, people were saying, no, that doesn't happen. So people have woken up. We have an administration that supports us, but this is just the first page of this book of actually officially winning for girl sports and standing for girl sports. So there's still a major fight there. But we also saw, again, CIF, they made clear they were not going to follow this executive order. And we just saw literally yesterday, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, she really cracked down. She sent a letter. I believe Maine received one. CIF in California received one. We saw a couple blue states receive them. And I love it. If you're watching on the screen, you can see the executive order here. If you're just listening, it's super easy to look up not the executive order, the letter from Attorney General Pam Bondi online. But my favorite part is she again starts to explain the difference between state and federal law, everything that you were saying, Julianne, that federal law, it says, where federal law and state law conflict, states and state entities are required to follow federal law. And then she goes, California should be on notice. And I love that she even says, I hope it doesn't come to this. I hope we don't have to take your federal funds, but we are going to if you guys don't get in line. They're not messing around. I was so stoked to see this letter pop up on my phone yesterday because I think we've seen in the past with other administrations from both sides of political parties that executive orders get put in place, but there's no hammer cracking down necessarily on people following them. And the Trump administration's cracking down. But Julianne, when you saw this letter, and the letter is to the executive director of CIF, Executive Director Nosetti, when you saw it, what kind of went through your head?
Yeah, I love the message of this letter. And, you and I were actually both at one of the meetings for CIF just a couple weeks ago, where we spoke up on behalf of not only the executive orders, but on behalf of female athletes. And the common theme and the message from all of us that got up and spoke was saying, CIF, you're put on notice. You've been put on notice. And to see the Attorney General now say, affirm, you've been put on notice. They've been put on notice multiple times. And so I love, again, this just goes back to seeing we have an administration that is willing to lead and take leadership and put some action behind their words. It's not just talk. It's not just this, message of, yes, we support female sports or female athletes. It's no, we believe in the importance of protecting our female athletes. We believe in fairness. And so the fact that our Attorney General is sending these letters and saying, you know what, California, CIF, you've been put on notice. And so you need to change your ways, or else you're going to face numerous consequences. And so, really, I hope that the state of California and CIF takes this message to heart, because really what's going to happen is more students are going to be hurt. California is going to be hurting more students because they risk losing federal funding. And like we said earlier, federal funding is huge for so many of these school districts and these athletic programs. And without federal funding, no one is going to get to play sports. And so it's so important for California to say, really let down their pride and say, okay, we recognize what federal law says. We're going to abide by federal law. But not only that, they're going to face multiple lawsuits. We already have our own lawsuit going, but there's going to be numerous other lawsuits that are going to cost the state and these school districts hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so there's no winning by California putting up this virtue signaling that they're doing. There's no winning for any students that are affected by this. And so I hope that, California takes these notices, hears us, and takes that to heart, and starts respecting federal law and respecting our female athletes.
Yes, and it's so interesting when you're even just sitting here during this conversation. The thing that keeps running through my head is in this conversation, when I'm doing research, when I'm going to events about protecting girls' sports, is where have we gone as a society that we have to keep going to events and putting in lawsuits and discussing that girls should have safe and fair sports? It's something that it's like, how did we get here so quickly? Where have we gone? How has society gone this far lost? And I know as a Christian, I can see it and understand that this is also a spiritual battle, and we live in a sinful, broken world. But it's just crazy that it's bold. And like you said, it shouldn't be bold to say girls' sports are for girls only. But I'm so excited to see what happens with your guys' lawsuit, what happens with Attorney General Pam Bondi cracking down on California and letting them know they're on notice. Again, a reminder to all of you listening, the battle has not been won. We need to keep fighting. We need to keep showing up. We need to keep speaking out. But with that, Julianne, if people want to read more about Advocates for Faith and Freedom's lawsuit against AB 1266, or this new Save Girls Sports program you guys have started, where can they find out more about that?
Sure. So to keep up to date on all of our cases, including Taylor and Caitlin's lawsuit, they can go to our website. That's www.faith-freedom.com. And we also have you can submit your email if you want to get monthly updates on all of our cases. And then we also created an association called Save Girls Sports, and that's for California parents and students who want to join. And really just it's a petition. Join the hundreds and thousands really of others who believe in this common sense and want to protect girls sports. And so they can go to our website. It is password protected because we were getting some trolls in there, so they can reach out to you individually or to us individually, and we can get them the needed password. But really, like you said, the fight isn't over, and so we need more people to take a bold stand. We need prayer. That's one of the biggest things. Like you said, this is it's as much a political, legal battle as it is a spiritual battle. The enemy loves to deceive. He loves to stir up lies. And so we need faithful prayer warriors that are praying over those that are having to be in the trenches, so to speak. And so we really appreciate the prayers of so many. And, I often tell my clients on all of our cases, I much rather stand on the side of righteousness and truth than on any other side. So, win or lose in the courtroom, when we're standing up for righteousness and truth, we've already prevailed, and so we trust that God goes before us in all things, and that's that. There's nothing more that as Christians we can hope to do.
Yes, I love that. So, all of you listening, stand for righteousness and truth. If you want to, again, check out Advocates for Faith and Freedom's website and all the information, it'll all be linked in the show notes. So, go check that out. Reach out to me. We can get you, if you reach out to me individually, we'll get you that password protected information so you can sign up. But, Julianne, thank you so much for coming on and taking time out of your busy schedule to update the community about what this executive order really did.
Of course, thanks for having me.